An epic tale with Optimus Prime, Megatron, Bumblebee, and the Dinobots that is better than Age of Extinction. Yes, I said it. Everyone, Divvy here. With all movie tie-ins aside, I feel like I should review the next installment in the series of Transformer games that actually matter. I already reviewed War of Cybertron, so I should definitely review Transformers Fall of Cybertron. I already own some of the figures here, so I figured it is about time that I actually review the video game itself. And one of the most interesting aspects about this game is actually the story itself, which takes place in the final minutes of Cybertron, and it is up to Optimus, Bumblebee, and the remaining Autobots to escape not only the destruction of Cybertron, but also the clutches of Megatron, who want to take the Autobots down with it. And that's one of the details that makes the story so interesting, is that there's some actual stakes, and there's a timer ticking down to this planet practically exploding, whereas in the first game it's simply just a war between the Autobots and the Decepticons. Here, they both kind of want the same goal, it's just a matter of who gets there first, and that's what made things so fascinating, especially when we start off with what's going to happen at the very end, but then we flash back to what led to the events that led up to the destruction of Cybertron, and everybody, not just the Autobots and the Decepticons, but any Transformer in general, trying to escape it and trying to keep the civilization of the Transformers alive. And it's actually one of the most captivating Transformer stories that I've actually witnessed in general, or experienced in general, in quite some time. Even after the movies and even some of the cartoons, even some of the better cartoons like Transformers, the animated series that was on I think it was on Cartoon Network some time ago. That was really good, but then it just ended, and that was a huge shame. Counting that, this is actually one of the better stories involving the Transformers that I've seen in a really long time. And one of the other things that I liked about the story is that it was much more focused, because this time there's actually only one campaign. In the original game, there were two campaigns. There was the Autobot one and the Decepticon one, and the game would allow you to choose who you wanted to play as. Here you do play as both Autobot and Decepticon, but there's only one story. You just jump from one faction to the other, and the game actually chooses who you play as in the next mission, whether it be an Autobot or a Decepticon. But you don't actually have control. And ironically, that kind of makes the story a little bit better, because like I said, it has a focus. It just has one clear campaign that has this planet about to explode, and both factions trying to reach the finish line. But of course, being that the Autobots are good and the Decepticons are evil, you play as them, and that's mainly just to give you some perks of how you can play as some of these characters. But ultimately, you know that this is a tale of good versus evil while trying to outrun the clock. And unlike some of those movie tie-ins or even the movies themselves, the story for this game, for this Transformers game, actually adopts the characters that you know and love from the original series. Like, everybody is just so in tune to what their character were when they were first introduced back in the 80s in the original cartoon. Optimus, you know, after witnessing Age of Extinction, where he's practically a bit of a dick, it's really refreshing to see that Optimus is actually the Optimus that we grew up with in any kind of incarnation. Armada, Cybertron, even the Beast Wars, where he's technically called Optimus Primal, you still know that that's Optimus Prime, and he still has that persona, not just in those series that we love, but also in this game. And you also got Bumblebee, you even got the Dinobots that are way better treated here than they were in the Michael Bay movie. And while on the subject of new characters, you got some other great appearances by some classic Transformer characters that maybe they haven't been used in an awful long time, whether it be in some of the shows that are on TV or even some of the video games. But seeing Metroplex or any other kind of Transformer that is just larger than life, and knowing how small Optimus is compared to characters like Metroplex, is just astonishing. And seeing these iterations of the Transformers, especially being handled very well on last gen system, which is the PlayStation 3 or the Xbox 360, it's just great to look at, especially considering that the design for some of these Transformers is a mixture between that organic feel that the Michael Bay movies had, while at the same time keeping that blockiness that they had from the original cartoon. And I love it when developers, just like in the Arkham franchise or Rocksteady Arkham franchise, they take elements from the much more realistic world that has been brought to us before, and in Batman's case it would be the Nolan universe, with some more I don't want to say cartoonish, but more comic booky elements that you know from the comics or from the cartoon series, and they blend them together to bring this new version of what you've known this whole time. But now you see this version, and you're like, oh wow, this is actually kind of refreshing. And I feel like Fall of Cybertron does what Arkham Asylum and Arkham City did. And that's not to discredit War for Cybertron, because some of the designs that you see in this game are actually rooted in that game. And I'm not going to discredit that game with its designs and presenting those designs first. But for some reason, I just took notice of them more with Fall of Cybertron, mainly because of just how well the entire universe is being handled here. Now, I said that some of these characters are actually quite faithful to their portrayals in the original 80s cartoons. But my only nitpick would have to be that sometimes they were just a little too faithful. There were a couple of corny moments here and there, and you know for a fact that that original cartoon from the 80s had its moments of cheese, where you're just like, okay, that was kind of unintentionally funny, but okay. And Fall of Cybertron has a couple of moments like that. The story's not completely riddled with them, but there are moments where you can tell that the people writing this game or developing this game were were reminiscing about that original 80s cartoon, that they put in their own little moments of cheese within this game as well. And this isn't so much a complaint as just a preference, but there's a part of me, just a small part of me, that kind of wishes that I only played as the Autobots in this game rather than the Autobots and the Decepticons, because the game actually allows you to play as the Autobots for like the first third of the campaign, and I'm like, oh, okay, we're just going to be the Autobots this time. That's cool, classic good versus evil story. But then it jumps you to being a Decepticon in one particular mission, and you have to kill these Autobots. They're mainly red shirts or red Autobots, but you know, it's a little daunting, just a little jarring, becoming a Decepticon all of a sudden and now having to kill Autobots, the faction that I've been in for the past like 3 or 4 hours in the campaign. So it's a little bit jarring, but I can look past it. Now, I already stated how great these Transformer designs look, but also what I appreciate about this game that I know for a fact the first game did not have were these little immersive moments where they didn't just have you go from point A to point B. When you're going from point A to point B in this game, there's certain events that take place where the camera would actually move about and show you things in a much more cinematic fashion. And I appreciated moments like that. It reminded me, just like I mentioned before, games like Batman, Arkham Asylum, and Arkham City, where you would have Batman walking down the hall, but then something happens in the background and the camera would just focus on that, and you're like, you feel like you're immersed into this world. This world feels a little bit more alive by just these tiny little details, and I love that they took those details and incorporated them into the campaign for this game. However, I'm a little saddened because that's actually where my compliments towards the presentation for this game kind of stop, because I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I played this on my HD TV as opposed to War for Cybertron, where I played on my standard television, my giant square television. And maybe I didn't take notice of this very much because of that, and when I jumped to this TV, I noticed that an awful lot. But unlike these images, which is kind of strange because these images look quite crisp and clear, there were moments in this game, in fact, the majority of the game, looks a little muddy when it comes to its textures. For some reason, the textures in the game just don't look right. When I started playing the game, I'm like, is something going on here? Do I need to toggle my brightness or my contrast or something like that to make these textures pop? Is it like a PC game where there's a little slider to move the quality of the textures, and that will affect the frame rate of some kind? I don't know, but I tried investigating into that and I just couldn't mess with it. So it turns out that these are the textures for the game, and in my personal opinion, they looked a little muddy and low res. And it's funny that I mentioned that little slider in PC games where the lower the texture is, the higher the frame rate will be, because you're compromising here. It's funny because this game doesn't compromise an awful lot, because there's moments where an awful lot of stuff is going on and there are a couple of frame rate issues. But don't fret, don't throw any stones, because quite frankly, I believe that's when my complaints for this game actually kind of stop, because then we get into what I really enjoyed about this game more so than the first, and that is the gameplay. This time, it feels a lot less repetitive than it did in the first one. If you guys remember my review for the first game, War for Cybertron, I stated that one of the detrimental things about that game in the gameplay was that it felt just a little bit repetitive, because all you did was just shoot enemies, move on to the next section, shoot enemies, move to the next section, and that's fine, but you need to have moments where you would take a break from that and introduce a new mechanic, introduce something new. This game actually did that, because there's moments where certain characters are introduced and certain combiners are brought to the forefront. And these characters, both separately and together, would introduce moments where it wasn't just shooting and then moving on to the next part. You would actually engage yourself in these melee sections where you need to destroy things, and you feel empowered because you're a bigger character than you were before, and you can use different weapons that you couldn't use with other characters, whether they be bigger characters that use melee weapons like swords or hammers or stuff like that, or smaller characters that are much more precise with sniper rifles and shooters. And being that they would jump back and forth between these two styles of gameplay, it made things a lot fresher than that first game did. And some of these missions did in fact have some really spectacular set pieces, especially when you bring in those very larger than life transformers like Metroplex. And I do believe this was presented in the War for Cybertron game, and I actually did like it in this game, so therefore I like it that they brought it back in Fall of Cybertron, and that is the upgrade system, where every now and then you can cash in on your experience points to be able to buy upgrades for either your weapons or your armor, make your character stronger, and therefore making the campaign all the more fun. But when it comes to upgrades, I think the more important detail would have to be that those upgrades need to be felt necessary. And I did feel like they were necessary in this game, because there were some moments that were genuinely challenging. If there was one thing to point out in the gameplay that I actually already mentioned, it would be that I would like to have just played as the Autobots. Don't get me wrong, playing as both the Decepticons and the Autobots is nice from a gameplay standpoint, because you get to use different characters, and therefore you get some new weapons, you get some new directives of what to do to progress in the mission. But catering to the story, I kind of prefer to have focused on just the Autobots in a Autobot versus Decepticon story. So that leaves us with just one more returning element from War for Cybertron, and that is the multiplayer. And I'm happy to report that, much like with the campaign, as well as different parts about the story, this is also much more improved than it was in the first game. Now, of course, you got your basic modes like Team Deathmatch or just regular Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, and this other mode, I can't remember the name of the mode, but I believe it was called Conquest, where you need to go ahead and capture these little nodes, and whoever has the most nodes on their team by the time that the clock runs out, or if they can't manage to capture all of them, wins. And it's your basic multiplayer fare. And just like in the first game, you got 4 classes to choose from to engage in those modes. And you can choose from the Infiltrator, the Destroyer, the Titan, and the Scientist. And each one comes with their own attributes and customization options for the weapons and the armor and stuff like that. But that's actually one of the amazing things about the multiplayer this time, is actually how deep the customization is this time around, because you can legitimately toggle with things that you could not mess with in the first game. I'm serious, you can mess with anything. I mean, just like in the first game, you can toggle which weapon they carry, which one is their primary weapon or their secondary weapon, and what kind of perks do they come with to be able to advance in the multiplayer maps. But here, you can change the head, you can change the shoulders, you can change the color. I mean, if you can clearly see here, this is the Optimus Prime model. I mean, here he's called the Destroyer, but it's the Optimus Prime model. But he's turquoise and purple. You can't do that in the first game, only here. And it might sound kind of weird here, but the fact that you get to toggle so many different facets of your characters here, down to what color their armor is, or even the wheels that they have in their vehicle mode, it just adds a sense of a personal touch. And because of that, when I was playing the multiplayer, unlike the first game, I actually wanted to keep playing and earn more experience points so that I can cash them in and get some more upgrades for not just the weapons and the perks, but also new customization options, because you can actually spend that XP on not just the basic stuff that you get with multiplayer, but also you can unlock new heads, a new chest, a new shoulders, stuff like that. And because it felt much more personal, I actually wanted to keep on doing it. I should have bought this game and rented the first one, and frankly I feel quite bad about it, but needless to say, the multiplayer this time around is really awesome. And you also got this bonus mode called Escalation, which is quite entertaining. I mean, it's the basic wave after wave of enemies type deal that you can do by yourself or with a friend. And it's a time killer. You know, it's a time waster. My only tiny little complaint with the multiplayer is that besides the customization options that keep you engaged to want to unlock different things, once you unlock them and you have everything, I don't really foresee the multiplayer for Fall of Cybertron to have that much of a lasting appeal. It will definitely last longer than the multiplayer for War for Cybertron did, but not enough to revisit time and time again. Overall, I'm happy to say that Transformers Fall of Cybertron is a significant improvement over the first game. I definitely made the wrong choice in which game I rented and purchased, and definitely one of the finer examples of how to handle a license. So for that, I give Transformers Fall of Cybertron an 8 out of 10. So let me know what you guys thought of Transformers Fall of Cybertron if you have purchased the game, but if you have not and would like to do so after watching my review, then be sure to use the link in the description below. It would really help me out a lot. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Say goodbye, Optimus. Bye. Bye-bye. Down here. I'm a loser.